Celtics Talk Podcast is presented by 24autogroup.com. 11 locations across New England.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into another episode of the Celtics Talk Podcast here on the NBC Sports Boston Podcast Network. An off-day pod, catching our breaths after that 6-game road trip. Celtics had 7,000 miles in the air over the course of it, but go 4-2 and finish strong, winning in Sacramento. And look, all the vibes are fixed. It's spring. Jaylen Brown says it's the energy is shifting again. I'm being a little bit joking here. I think we need to see it over a little bit longer of a stretch, but certainly as encouraging of a win as this team has had in a while, and reminded you what the potential is, especially when at full health, when their core players are all clicking, and they got to bottle that up. They got to get back to defending the way they did against them. So here's what we got coming up. Chris Gasper was in the house for early edition, dragged him in to the pod room as well, kind of pick his brain about where the Celtics are at, a lot of the storylines going on with Jaylen Brown, a lot of headlines from his appearances with stories on the Ringer and the New York Times, and just the general state of the team and what he thinks is going on. But again, I want to start here. I've rode the roller coaster for a lot of the season in terms of the good nights. You're like, okay, here we go. They're a legit title contender. And then they have nights like they did in Utah. And you're like, oh man, what's going on? So I want to be consistent with this. As good as that win was the other night, they got to continue to show it. And I do think you'll hear me and Gasper talking a little bit about seeding. I think it's very important that, if they have a chance to get into that 1 seed, every little bit that you can make your journey that much easier, you have to go for it. And, start thinking about game 7s and what a showdown it would be if they're lucky enough to see Milwaukee in some form, and whether that's the Eastern Conference Finals or not. Every little advantage will help because of how good the Bucks have been lately, even how good the Sixers have been as they surge, even if I'm not nearly as worried about that team right now. But 3 games coming up at home, a chance to, 3 games coming up against inferior competition that can get them a little bit more momentum before that Milwaukee showdown for a potential tiebreaker. So I'm just eager to see if it can snowball. You'll probably have all your horses for those games. Rob has been back, and even though he only played 21 minutes, encouraging stretch. Al Horford, no back-to-backs until the second night after the Milwaukee game. So you should have this group together. I will say, too, I brought it up on yesterday's post-game pod. I thought it was interesting that Joe Mazzulla said when Abby asked him about the starting lineup and the idea of whether they go back to last year's starting 5, the one that dominated the league in the second half of the year. And Joe sort of said, I don't know if that's our starting lineup, because for the majority of this season, it's been the Derek White and the 4 core players instead of Rob, because Rob has obviously missed 29 games at the start of the year and now a bunch with the hamstring injury, and then Derek's just filled in along the way. So very intrigued to see how that plays out. There is some thought to, if Rob and Al stagger and play together in certain instances, takes away the need to lean on any of your other bigs, which, again, as good as Blake has been in stretches and Luke Cornett has been at times this season, it gives you the ability to really lean into your core, and which is what we saw in Sacramento. Derek White getting over 35 minutes, Malcolm Brogdon, Marcus Smart all playing a ton of minutes. And then the Jays playing well, and Grant being out there, and Grant sort of reestablishing himself and showing what he can do. So a good way to close the trip. Eager to see where it goes from here when the Pacers come to town on Friday night. All right, let's get into the good stuff. Here's my chat with Chris Gasper. All right, Gasper, we just did this whole podcast for early edition, but for those who didn't DVR it, and we'll now replicate it. The headline was still worried from your article today. And I know you don't write headlines, but tell me why you're, even after the Celtics had maybe their most complete game, at least of 2023, maybe of the 2022-23 season, really, it felt like at times. Why are you still worried about this game?
Yeah, I'm still worried, Forsberg, because I know they can do what they did against Sacramento, and that is their identity. And to go out there and shoot 40% from 3 and make 7 of 12 threes in the third quarter and score 9 straight possessions. But what happens when that's not working? I guess, this is nitpicky a little bit, but I just feel like when you get to the postseason, to play offense at that level for 2.5 months, for 4 rounds, for 16 wins is asking a lot.
It is.
It's asking a lot. And so that's sort of my concern. I still haven't seen from them that there's sort of a plan B there, when they don't have their best. And that certainly was their best against Sacramento. I mean, that's them at their best. But show me you can win against a quality team when you're not at your best.
Yeah. And so I think, I start thinking about a few things back to back for Sacramento. They don't play a lot of defense as it is. So it sort of was set up for the Celtics to have a feel-good game there. And yet, like, it was refreshing to see them go to the 8-man rotation, to get Rob back, to get an efficient Jason Tatum. So there's little things I like, but I'm with you. Like, it's funny because, and I've been joking about it all day because, you know, even I ride the roller coaster as much as anybody, but, you know, I have friends who are just like, see, told you there's never any issues. There was no problems. And I'm like, we've been watching the same team for 2.5 months. Because you talked about it. You have to be great for 2.5 months in the playoffs. Well, the past 2.5 months for the Boston Celtics have been a middling offense, some questionable rotation decisions, some questionable personnel decisions, and Jason Tatum has been in a slump recently. And you add it all up with Rob Williams not being out there, and it's the sort of roller coaster that we've gotten. I like I said, I want to see it now. It's so weird to say. It's great that they get up for Sacramento. They always get up for the big games. Now I need to see it against the Wizards, the Pacers, and the Spurs. 3 of the worst teams in the league. How do you think these last 9 games play out for the Boston Celtics?
I think the focus will be there. And I think that there was an emphasis just listening to Jaylen Brown, listening to Joe Mazzulla, the Celtics put on social media, him addressing the team after the game.
Interesting, right? Like that, you know.
Yeah, that was a little interesting, wasn't it?
They don't post those after they catch the L's and all that. But
it was good. He's saying, that's the team I know. You're basically saying these guys, you know, thanks for listening. You know, this is our identity, you know, blah, blah, blah. He talked about the fact they had only 5 turnovers and 33 assists. So I think the focus will be there. I do think they sort of lost focus, which I'll be honest, Forsberg, when they started 21-5, I was like, this is not sustainable. They're going to burn themselves out. Like these wins are great, but they're coming out and playing 26 straight games. Like it's game 6 of the NBA finals all over again. And you can't do that for 82 games.
And it's so funny because it was we know why, right? Because Joe Mazzulla gets elevated to head coach and they were so bad at the start of the year before. And there was such a priority, like, hey, like we're going to win early. We're not going to fall into that hole. And then we'll be able to pace ourselves from there.
And here they are, 2 games back of the number 1 seed, having to scratch and claw for it in the last 9 games.
And it's just, it's somewhat ironic. And I do think the same thing. We all sat there and said, 1, it's not sustainable. And 2, when is it going to catch up and bite them? And you hope it wouldn't be in the NBA finals if they were lucky enough to get back there. But yeah, like that's my fear too, is like all of a sudden you've expended a lot of energy with Jason Tatum to be the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference right now, or 2nd seed, whatever the standings are today. But you know, you got to work. Do they have to finish 1 or 2? Can they be the 3rd seed? Are you comfortable with
I don't think there's a big difference between 2 and 3. I do think there's a difference, a significant one for them between 1 and 2 for me, because I think that, and I know people say, hey, look, they beat the number 1 seed on the road last year. They went into Miami and they won the game 7. But I mean, Miami was pretty banged up. Like Tyler Hero was a shell of himself. Kyle Lowry wasn't right. Jimmy Butler played, but he was hurt. And if Jimmy Butler hits that 3, it's maybe a whole different situation. So I can't look at that and say like, oh, I definitely feel good about them playing a number 1 seeded Milwaukee team in a game 7 on Milwaukee's floor at Fiserv Forum and walking away with that. Do I think they're capable? I think they are capable. But would I feel a lot better about it if I knew that game were in Boston? I absolutely would. So I do think the number 1 seed is something worth going after. And I wrote this in my column, like, I kind of can't believe we're having this conversation, because back in the fall, it's like the number 1 seed was a fait accompli. And now it's like, oh, are they going to get this or not?
Yeah, it is really wild that, I mean, and I think that's part of the reason that we all, even when they were playing badly, they were still so far ahead. I think it was January 21st. They were still 4.5 games up on the Bucks, 5.5 on the 76ers. They had the best record in basketball. And you're just like, oh, they're going to kind of waltz to the finish line. Then the Bucks decided to win 16 straight. The Sixers rip off 8 wins, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, things got a little difficult. The reason I think home court is advantage is just what you laid out. Like Grant Williams isn't making 7 threes in Fiserv Forum. So, you know, it's that simple. Although I guess he did just have a good game on the road.
Did he just make 7 threes?
And they lost the game. You know, it's like, but again, we're gonna. How confident are you in Joe Mazzulla going into a playoff series?
I'm pretty confident. I mean, it's kind of like they used to say in football with Patriots rookies don't know what rookies don't know. And there's an element of that with Mazzulla, like learning on the fly. But, you know, I think he's made some adjustments, and I just think it's kind of hard as a coach in the NBA to be the reason a team wins or loses.
Okay.
You know, I know people have some concerns about the rotation stuff. It is a little shocking to me when you look at their lineups, like their best 5 lineups, to see how good that lineup with the, you know, 4 guys, Horford, the Jays, and Smart and Derek White is, and then not like see that lineup out there. So what is it? It's like plus 23 or something. It's like insane. But I know he's analytically oriented. The team is too. I think they'll orient him to that, and he'll do that more often. So I'm not like super concerned about it. Yes, I think there could be a series or two. And this happened to Brad, right? Early on, where, Mike Budenholzer maybe gets you in a game, or if Tom Thibodeau gets you in a game or two. But I'm not panicking about it. And I'll say this. I've been critical of Missoula at times, but I wasn't as upset about the Utah game as other people when they're like, where's Derek White? And I understand why you're upset, because you look at the numbers, but I'm also like, they're getting hammered on the boards in this game. And Derek White's not going to change that. Like, he knew, they're giving up 17 offensive rebounds. Like, I'm not going to get mad at the coach for not putting another point guard in there when they're getting hammered on the boards.
Fair. But like, when my only justify the way to justify that is Mike Muscala and Luke Cornett were big and they still weren't even getting rebounds.
Yeah.
So at some point you just lean on your best players, which is just like my theory in general.
Okay.
Like, I don't understand how Derek White has played 30% of crunch time minutes in a season where, you need as good a bodies out there. I get it. They have 3-point guards. Like, we could spend all day on this. The bottom line is 13-2 when Derek White plays 35 plus minutes. Just find a way to get all these money minutes. When a player does all good things when they're out there, find a way to use them more.
So it's interesting. I'm listening to you talk about Derek White. It's almost like, I don't know, he should have some sort of catchphrase or a hashtag, like hashtag winning plays or something.
Well, okay, I'm gonna open up the floor to you. This is I only invite you on during Marcus Smart rough patches. So
I've actually enjoyed watching him play this year. Most of this season, I think he's been good.
I actually think the past 2.5 weeks since the All-Star break, he's been. So here's what I think happened. He came out of the All-Star break. He was already coming back from injury, and the injury has hindered him all sort of year, and or at least if you trust what he says. And Tatum has now been on the ball more for the duration of his injury, and then Marcus has to reintegrate, but he's off ball more. And so he's out of the offense a little bit. And so he's taking more shots. And we know what happens. He struggles with his shot. The winning percentage goes down. Like, it's not playing to Marcus Smart's strengths. He's had games in this stretch. I thought the Utah game, chief among them, was like really good game for him. He like really kind of facilitated everything, did his thing. And yet, too often lately he has defaulted to taking more shots because he's not either directing the offense as much. I do think there's a sweet spot for Marcus Smart. So, but I am interested. Closing lineup.
Yes.
Are you still putting Marcus Smart out there?
Not automatically. That's the part I don't understand why it's like a constitutional right for him to be out there every time. I don't get it. I don't get it. And I don't get it for a couple of reasons. One, because I think when Ime was here, he talked about, he came right out and said he didn't think there was a huge drop off defensively between Derek White and Smart, from Smart to White. Right. And Smart himself has said this year his defense hasn't. I mean, I'm sorry. Emmanuel Quickly's like torching you. Davion Mitchell was torching you in the first half of that game. So I think like 80% of the time, yes, he should be in the closing lineup. But I think on nights where he doesn't have it, the way this team is constructed, there's a reason you went out and got 2 other point guards. If you're Brad Stevens, if you really felt like Marcus Smart was a surefire lock, number 3 guy in the hierarchy of stars that you put out automatically every night, then you're not trading for Derek White and you're not trading for Malcolm Brogdon. And you did that so that your coach has other options on nights when maybe Smart isn't the best option. And I just don't understand. So I'm with you on the Derek White thing, but for me on some of those nights, it's like, it's not Derek White and Smart. It's Derek White instead of Smart.
Yeah. And I can't argue with that point. I think the one thing I love about Smart is no matter how bad he has been for a game or whatever, there's a chaos factor with him. He's going to make something crazy happen that in crunch time. And sometimes it's bad. Sometimes he like tries to jump over someone and get a foul call and it works against you. But I think more often than not, he's the one making some crazy save or taking the James Harden charges. And I know I'm going back like 5 seasons now to find.
No, I know what you're saying.
But I do think they like the chaos factor. But I agree. If he's just not positively impacting winning in that stretch and he hasn't earned the right to be out there in that game, if you are going by this idea of button pushing, and Joe has to be able to find the right pieces that go out there. My other concern is that the Malcolm Brogdon, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown lineup, like when the 3 of them are out there together, for whatever reason, has just not been good.
Yeah, the numbers are bad.
And there's no rhyme or reason except that like Brogdon needs to be on the ball more, or just like doesn't get as many touches, or isn't as impactful. And yet you flip Derek White from Malcolm Brogdon in that instance, and the numbers go great. And maybe that's just because Derek's been with the starters more often.
I think that sort of makes sense based on what you just said. Like Derek White, I think, first of all, he can drive when someone closes out on him. But Derek White, I think, is much more content, even though Brogdon shot the 3 great this year, to sort of just stand in the corner and wait for that pass to come to him. Whereas Brogdon, like you said, if Brogdon's like, oh, I got this matchup over here, he's going to pound it into the ground a little bit and try and take advantage of that. And for me, with like to go back to the White Smart thing, it's kind of like when you have a running back tandem, right? Like you have 2 running backs that can be starters, and you just see how the game goes and you ride the hot hand. That's the way I look at the White Smart thing.
Sure. No, that's all fair. And what a great Patriots analogy based on all their 57 running backs.
Yeah, if Ramondre has it, or Damian Harris, or Pierre Strong, or if it's Bijan Robinson, if they draft him, or now James Robinson, you ride the hot hand.
So just go full Belichick, Missoula, and you'll be okay.
Look no further than the award-winning 24 Auto Group. With over 2,600 vehicles in stock, the brands you love, backed by the savings and service you can count on. Visit today or shop online at 24autogroup.com.
I want to wrap with a little bit about, so we talked a lot about Jaylen Brown, and he's the other headline right now because of some stories that he partook in and made some comments to the Ringer and to the New York Times, and it left Celtics fans feeling, a little worried. I think the general gist I get is people are like, oh, is Jaylen going to be here forever? What's your, just digesting the entire situation, what's your general take on where things stand with Jaylen, and does his comments concern you at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much to unpack there. I'll just stick to sort of the basketball related comments, and maybe the ones attached to the city of Boston, which, I think does sort of play a part in it. I don't know what experiences he's had here. I do know he's very involved in the community. The Dorchester versus Roxbury, tournament that goes on, Hammurabi Park, he showed up, he just rolled up at that.
Yeah.
And he was a pretty big deal. And I know people are really happy with, he does stuff in the community here in Boston. It means a lot to the community. I think a lot of what he was saying and where it was coming from is this idea of sort of he's on edge, hey, I know you guys are committed to JT, but are you committed to me? Are you constantly looking for an upgrade from me to pair with Jason? And he sort of even said in that Ringer story, he's like, hey, JT and KD are friends and they're working out. And I didn't know what was going on. And I think one thing, and I don't know this, but I would say I'm trying to think the right way to sort of frame this. I would just say that I think that when decisions with the Celtics are made, Jason Tatum is definitely consulted.
Right. How much of them
I think on some decisions, like when they hired Ime last year, Jaylen Brown is consulted. But I don't think he's consulted on every decision the way Jason Tatum is. And I think Jaylen Brown feels like maybe he should be.
The only part of that article that maybe raised my eyebrows a little bit was when Jaylen said, so I made the conference call, the three-way call. That shouldn't be Jaylen Brown making that call. That's got to be Brad making that call. And so I hope it's just one of those things, like when you're retelling a story, you just kind of you get some of the parts of it wrong. Because if he's the one who has to call Jason and Brad and be like, yo, what's going on here? Then Brad has missed an opportunity to nip that in the bud. And
I agree with you. But I also think it's telling, it's kind of telling again, I get it, the hierarchy of the team, Jason Tatum's number one, but he had to call Jason. So he's calling Jason Tatum and Brad Stevens about a Celtics personnel issue that involves him, which tells you that Brad is sort of, I don't want to say deferring, that's not consulting Jason Tatum on these matters. And I think if you're Jaylen, there can maybe be some insecurity there about, okay, well, so you mean to say, I was here before this guy, and I look at it, I've been saying this all year. It's about the tandem, not Tatum. But a lot of times with the team, it feels like it's about Tatum, and he's the way he's promoted and all that stuff. And he's better than JB. I get it. But I don't think the gap, we just did the show with Tom Curran, and Curran says Jaylen Brown's one of the 25 best players in the league. I think he's one of the 15 best players in the league. Sure. And I think Tatum's one of the best half dozen players in the league. So that gap, I think, is closer than people think. And I think it's closer than maybe even the Celtics think. And I think that at times sort of gets under Jaylen's skin that 100%. They don't do it.
I 100% agree, because I think about, as I told you on the show, you just go back to day one. Yeah. Danny drafts him and they're booing, and they're not booing him. Yeah. But how else are you going to take it as Jaylen Brown? And then every single year for your career, you are in a trade rumor of some sort, whether warranted or unwarranted, the James Harden stuff. And then, just everybody's been through the mill. So Kawhi and now this. And so I do understand where he's just like, what do I got to do to be on that level where the people of Boston understand I'm a superstar, where my own team understands I'm a superstar, and treat me to the level that Jason Tatum is healthy.
But I don't think he's ever going to be treated at the level that Tatum is. I mean, I go back to the playoffs last year, and I know I've talked about this a lot, but that game, I'm trying to remember what game it was in that series. It might've been game 4, because it was a home game for the Celtics, where basically everybody else no-showed. He scored the 40 points, but he had 7-8 turnovers.
Yep.
And immediately people are like, what a terrible game. This guy turned it over all over the place. And then you looked at the NBA finals and like Jason Tatum struggled and he turned the ball over all over the place. And people were like, Jaylen Brown has to do something about his turnovers. It's like one of those things like, when you're a kid and it's like you get blamed for what your siblings do. It's kind of like Jaylen's like, okay, I get it. Like I had a lot of turnovers, but I also dropped 40 points when nobody else showed up. And you guys are like, so what about your turnovers? So he's kind of like, what's going on? When you feel like parents play favorites, like I feel like that's somewhat, and I don't know this. I'm projecting, I'm psychoanalyzing. I've never heard this from Jaylen Brown or anybody around him, but I think he kind of looks at it and is like, this is a little bit of a double standard here. Like, what's going on? Like, this guy can basically do no wrong. I just dropped 40 and you want to know about my turnovers.
I laugh because it's so true. And I've tried to take a greater appreciation because even on nights that Jaylen has like these magical games, if Tatum makes the last shot, the headline is Jason Tatum saves the Celtics. And I'm like, So my only advice to Jaylen would be like, hang in there. I think there's a great section of this fan base that appreciates you. It's weird that we all have to be like, there's this Jason supporters and Jaylen supporters.
Well, he said that. He's like, he said in one of the stories, I can't remember which one it was, but basically, people want to pit us against each other and we don't see it that way.
Right. And which is great. Like, thank God they have the vision to be able to do that because like stupid sports writers like me will just like continue to focus on, you're right. And it's, we nitpick everything and that's the way it is. He does have to tighten up the handle. No, I'm just kidding.
He does. He absolutely does. I agree. I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that one bit.
But you do feel bad that he should get more praise in situations, and instead it feels like he's just constantly defending himself.
It just feels like with him, I guess with some I think a better analogy in this is probably actually Marcus Smart, who's his friend, right? Smart has flaws as a player. You may have heard me say that before, but he still is a good player who helps them win. But with Marcus Smart, I would say it feels like, generally speaking, the fan base really focuses on his positives. It doesn't talk about his negatives. With Jaylen Brown, it feels like there's a portion, at least of the fan base, that really harps on his negatives and doesn't focus on the positives of a guy that's a multiple-time All-Star and a wing averaging, 26 points per game. That's pretty hard to find.
So hard. So, I don't disagree. I do love that you've continued to find ways to get Marcus Smart strays into.
Seriously, I've enjoyed the way he's played this year. I feel like he has really accepted his role. And I only bring up, Smart because, again, it's just the situation of what Brad said after last year. We needed more playmaking against Golden State. And also because I do think Marcus Smart is sort of embodies the fickleness in a way of the Celtics fan base, where it's like, here's this guy who's very good at what he does and we love him and he's our guy. And here's this other guy who's really like a franchise type player in Jaylen Brown, but he has some warts to his game. And, but we're going to embrace this other guy because he plays really hard.
Right. Yeah, no, it's fair. It's absolutely fair. I mean, I love when you put it in that context. Yeah. Because I'm not going to have you on again. Last thing. Yeah. How does the season end? Do they win it?
Oh man. What do they do? You're really putting me on the spot.
You can hedge too. You can be like, well, if this happens, then maybe they have a chance.
I think here's what I'll say. If they get out of the East, they're going to win the title.
Okay.
For me, it's about getting out. I would be surprised if they made it back to the finals and didn't win it. Wow. I have some fear of Milwaukee and frankly, fear of Chris Middleton. He's starting to round back into shape. He's playing well. My one question on Milwaukee is, even with Middleton playing well, when they play the Celtics, does Milwaukee have enough firepower? Can they score? Can they generate enough points to keep up with the Celtics? And that's where I sort of feel like the difference in that series could be. I'll go back to this. Every time the Celtics and Milwaukee play, the team with home court wins the series. Like, going back to what, 2018, every team in that series, every team that was the home team won that series. Obviously it was a little different to Kyrie.
I was going to say 2001. Celtics got the first one.
that was a little different, but like last year's series, awesome performance in Game 6 by the Celtics, but having Game 7 on their home court, and so that's what I'm worried about the most, is who has home court in that series. So I'll say this: if Milwaukee gets eliminated before they face the Celtics are definitely winning the championship.
Wow. All right. I'm not sure I see that happening. Like Philly would have to go like on a super heater, but Celtics do have Philly's number, so I see your roadmap, but all right. Well, I'm going to save the tape on all this.
Okay.
Mark praise and Celtics win. The Bucks get eliminated. Thank you, Gasper.
Sounds good, Forsberg.
All right. Good stuff as usual from Gasper. Love his takes. I love busting his chops about the Marcus Smart hot takes. And because we all know Marcus isn't a perfect player, but he wins you over with a lot of the hustle and that. Gasper just isn't as easily swayed as some of us. There's only so much that a charge take can do, or get Gasper to jump on that side. But I do align with what he said. Celtics Bucks. It feels like the Bucks are the biggest impediment to whatever they want to accomplish this season. So if they don't have to see them, or for whatever reason things get weird or wild, I'll be very interested to see just how far the Celtics can go. That's why you don't want to see that matchup until probably the Eastern Conference Finals, which, if the Celtics are in that 2-3 spots, is probably what will happen. So, or if they get up to 1, maybe they don't have to do it, and then you have them coming to Boston if you're lucky enough to get that far. All right, I need everybody to go like, subscribe, check us out on the YouTube page. Keep checking out post-game pods. What do we got? 9 more to go. It's gonna be steamrolling here. A lot of games over the next 3 weeks to just get to the finish line of this year. Intrigued to see where this goes, how we're feeling about it. Trying not to ride the roller coaster, but hoping Jaylen's right about the whole energy shifting, because the Celtics need to get locked back in and be the team that we saw in the first half of the year. We'll catch you next time on the Celtics Talk Podcast.